But tonight, as you rest, you feel not danger but wonder. To know the surface is restless is to know the planet is alive, dynamic, in motion. It is to realize you are part of a world that is not static, but unfolding, reshaping itself in cycles of creation. The ground may feel steady, but it is never still. You drift further into thought, imagining the future. Continents will continue their dance. Oceans will widen and close. New mountains will rise where plains now stretch. In hundreds of millions of years, a new supercontinent will form. Pangaea reborn, or some new configuration, unknown and unnamed. The restless skin of Earth will keep moving long after you are gone, long after even humanity is gone. This thought brings not fear, but peace. You are part of a story far older, far slower, far greater than yourself. To live here is to ride the moving plates, to walk across drifting continents, to sleep on a skin that never ceases to shift. You are carrying the rhythm of the planet's endless dance. You close your eyes and imagine the ground beneath you. It feels firm, unyielding, certain. The soil holds you. The pavement carries you. The mountain rises as though eternal. Yet the stillness is only an illusion. Beneath your feet lies a restless skin, a surface that never sleeps, forever shifting, cracking, colliding, and drifting. The earth you stand on is alive with movement, even if you cannot feel it. This surface, the crust, is thin, almost fragile compared to the vast body of the planet. Like the skin of an apple, it is only a narrow layer over the deeper mantle below. Yet within the skin lies everything you know, continents and oceans, forests and deserts, cities and homes. It feels complete. It feels whole. But in truth, it is broken into pieces. These pieces are enormous slabs of rock, drifting across the globe. Scientists call them tectonic plates. They are the puzzle pieces of the planet, fitting together along seams that run like scars across the surface. Some are as large as continents, others stretch beneath oceans, but all of them are in motion. Slowly, silently, they creep across the mantle at the pace of fingernails growing. A few centimeters each year may seem like nothing, but over millions of years it reshapes the world. You breathe slowly, picturing the continents as rafts floating on a deep sea. They do not sit still. They wander, they collide, they drift apart. The Earth's surface is not fixed. It is fluid in slow motion. What seems stable in your lifetime is, in deep time, as restless as waves. Once, long ago, people believed the Earth's surface was unchanging. Mountains were thought eternal, continents fixed. The idea of moving land felt impossible. Yet evidence began to whisper otherwise. Fossils of the same creatures were found on continents now separated by vast oceans. Rocks on distant shores carried identical patterns. It was as though the pieces had once been joined, then pulled apart. In the early 20th century, Alfred Wegener suggested a bold idea: continents drift. He imagined them once united in a supercontinent he called Pangaea, slowly breaking apart over millions of years. At first, the world laughed. Land seemed too solid to move. But the evidence grew, and eventually the truth became clear. The restless skin was not myth, it was reality. Now you picture the plates as travelers, each on a slow but unstoppable journey. Some move toward each other, colliding in immense force. Some drift apart, creating space for new crusts to rise from below. Some slide past one another, grinding in silence until tension breaks into earthquakes. Their motion is a heartbeat of the planet, a cycle of creation and destruction, of renewal and collapse. You breathe deeply, feeling the rhythm of this cycle. At the mid-ocean ridges, deep beneath the waves, the earth opens like a seam. Magma rises from the mantle, cools, and forms new crust. The seafloor spreads, carrying oceans wider and continents further apart. Elsewhere at trenches, the crust bends and sinks back down, swallowed into the mantle to melt and be reborn. The restless skin is also a recycling system, endlessly renewing itself. To live on Earth is to rest on a surface that is temporary. The mountain that seems eternal will one day crumble. The ocean that feels endless will one day close. Even the continents themselves are wandering, shifting slowly across the globe. Africa is drifting toward Europe. Australia is moving north. The Atlantic Ocean is widening even now, millimeter by millimeter, year by year. And yet, you feel no need for fear. The scale of this movement is vast. To tectonic plates, human history is but a breath, a flicker of time. Their dance is measured not in years, not in centuries, but in millions of years. What they change slowly, steadily, with patience that stretches beyond imagination. Still, their power is undeniable. You remember the tremble of earthquakes, the eruption of volcanoes, the rise of mountain ranges. These moments are the sudden expressions of deep emotions, the restless skin revealing its energy. They remind you that the ground beneath you is alive. You close your eyes and imagine the ocean. It feels eternal, vast, unchanging, stretching forever into horizon. Its waves lap the shore as they have for countless generations. But deep beneath the surface, hidden from sight, the ocean floor is not still. It is splitting, spreading, remaking itself in rhythms that span millions of years. The oceans, too, are restless. They open, they close, they breathe with the slow pulse of the earth. The process begins at mid-ocean ridges, places where the crust tears open like the seam of a garment. Picture a zipper slowly pulling apart the seafloor, mile after mile. From below, molten rock rises through the crack, glowing with heat, bubbling with energy. As it reaches the water, it cools, hardens, and becomes new ocean crust. In this way, the ocean floor is born again, not once, but continuously, stretching out in both directions from the ridge like two arms reaching wide. You drift into this image, mountains hidden beneath the sea. At these ridges, volcanoes rise unseen, creating entire chains of undersea mountains taller than the Himalayas. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge alone stretches for more than 40,000 miles, winding through every ocean like a scar across the planet's skin. If you could drain the oceans, these ridges would form the longest mountain ranges on Earth. The seafloor, once thought ancient, is in fact young. No part of it lasts more than 200 million years, a brief span compared to the Earth's 4.5 billion year history. The crust beneath your feet on land may be billions of years old, but beneath the ocean, it is always being renewed. Old seafloor drifts away from ridges and eventually sinks into trenches, recycled into the mantle. New seafloor takes its place. The oceans expand and contract like lungs, inhaling and exhaling across time. You breathe slowly, in rhythm with this thought. Expansion is quiet, almost imperceptible. The Atlantic Ocean widens each year by the width of your fingernail. On human timescales, it feels like nothing, but over tens of millions of years, continents drift apart, pulled by this spreading seafloor. Once, South America and Africa touched. Now, the Atlantic lies between them, and still it grows wider. But oceans do not only open, they also close. At subduction zones, where plates collide, old ocean floor bends downward, sliding beneath the edge of another plate. The crust disappears, sinking back into the mantle. One day, the Atlantic too will begin to close. Its spreading will end, its seafloor consumed, its waters narrowed until continents once again meet. This is a cycle of oceans, opening and closing, breathing in and out, endlessly repeating. You let this rhythm calm you. Oceans are not fixed. They are temporary, like clouds shifting in the sky. They exist only for a time, then give way to new shapes, new coasts, new possibilities. The Earth is not a stage set in stone, but a living world in motion. Think of Pangaea, the great supercontinent that existed 300 million years ago. Around it stretched the vast Panthalassa Ocean. Over time, Pangaea broke apart, and new oceans opened between the drifting continents. The Atlantic was born, the Indian Ocean widened, the Pacific reshaped. One day, far in the future, the continents will drift back together, and the oceans as you know them will vanish, replaced by new seas and new shores. You breathe into this truth. Even the oceans, symbols of eternity, are impermanent. Their waves may seem timeless, but their basins come and go. The ground beneath the water shifts constantly, silently, shaping coastlines, climates, and the lives of every creature within. This knowledge does not disturb your rest. Instead, it brings peace. For the cycles of opening and closing have gone on long before you, and will continue long after. The ocean you know is one verse in a longer song, one chapter in an unending story. To float upon it is to be carried by deep time. The chapter softens as you drift with this awareness. The oceans open, the oceans close. Crust is born, crust is consumed. The planet renews itself in rhythms too slow to feel, yet steady as breath. And in this gentle rhythm lies the transition. If oceans are created and destroyed, then somewhere they must be consumed. The restless skin swallows itself at the deep trenches, where seafloor bends into darkness, feeding the mantle below. The next step leads you into that silence, into the fire and depth of subduction. You lie still, breathing in the memory of oceans that open and spread. You have drifted with the slow widening of seas, the quiet rise of new crust along hidden ridges. But as new crust is born, old crust must also be destroyed. The earth cannot grow endlessly. Its restless skin renews itself in balance. What is made in one place is consumed in another. And so you turn toward the great trenches, the edges of plates, where the seafloor bends downward and disappears into the depths. Here is the realm of subduction, where earth swallows itself. Picture the ocean floor moving slowly toward a continent. For millions of years, the crust has drifted outward from a mid-ocean ridge, carrying sediments, fossils, and the quiet memory of time. At last, it reaches the boundary of another plate. It does not stop. It bends, dives, sinks. Like a conveyor belt slipping into the darkness, the crust slides beneath the edge of the overriding plate, descending into the mantle below. The line where this happens is called a trench, a scar on the surface of the planet, deep and shadowed. The Mariana Trench, the deepest of them all, plunges nearly 11 kilometers beneath the sea, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. To peer into its depth is to look into the Earth's most hidden places. You breathe slowly, imagining that descent. Cold, dense seafloor, once floating high, now plunges downward into the mantle's heat. As it sinks, water locked in its rocks is released, rising into the mantle above. This water lowers the melting point of rock, allowing magma to form. And so, from destruction comes creation. Volcanoes rise above subduction zones, arcs of fire marking the edges of oceans. The Pacific Ring of Fire is one such place. Here, plates sink on all sides, and volcanoes circle the ocean like glowing beads on a necklace. Japan, Indonesia, the Andes, Alaska, all born of subduction. Earthquakes ripple here too, sudden and violent, as plates lock, strain, and break free. Life along these edges is shaped by both danger and renewal. You rest in the awareness of this cycle. Subduction is not only destruction, it is transformation. Crust disappears, but its matter is not lost. It melts, rises, emerges again as mountains and volcanoes. The surface of the earth is recycled, endlessly reshaped. What seems like an end is also a beginning. Imagine, for a moment, the journey of a single piece of crust. Born in mid-ocean ridge, it drifts outward slowly, carrying with its shells sediments, the remains of tiny creatures that fall to seafloor. For hundreds of millions of years, it travels across the ocean. At last, it reaches a trench, and its time as seafloor ends. It bends, sinks, vanishes. But deep below, its minerals are reborn in magma, rising again in fire. What was once ocean floor may one day become mountain peak. You breathe into this truth. Nothing on Earth is wasted. Even the crust itself is renewed. Subduction is the planet's way of balancing, of keeping its skin fresh, of ensuring that creation and destruction remain inseparable. But balance does not mean peace. At subduction zones, stress builds where plates grind against each other. Sometimes they stick, locked for centuries, until strain grows unbearable. Then, in one sudden moment, they slip, the ground shudders. Waves of energy race outward. The result is an earthquake, sometimes gentle, sometimes devastating. The 2011 earthquake in Japan, born of subduction, shook the sea floor so violently that the ocean itself surged onto land. The 2004 earthquake in the Indian Ocean sent waves racing across entire coastlines, taking lives and reshaping shores. These moments remind us of the immense power stored in the silent descent of plates. Yet even in their violence, subduction zones are also places of life. Volcanoes enrich soil with minerals, making land fertile for forests and fields. The Andes, towering along South America's edge, are both the result of collision and the source of life-giving rivers. In the shadow of destruction grows abundance. The paradox is woven deep. Danger and renewal, fire and fertility, all born from the same restless motion. You let this paradox settle softly in your mind. Subduction is not a tragedy, but a cycle. The earth is not still, and it is not safe in the way you sometimes imagine, but it is alive, dynamic, endlessly creating through destruction. To rest on this planet is to rest on change itself. The chapter quiets as you imagine trenches hidden beneath the waves, silent mouths swallowing crust into the deep. Above them rise chains of volcanoes, arcs of fire curving across the earth. Beneath them, earthquakes store and release their sudden energy. All of it is the same story, a planet renewing itself through recycling of its own skin. You breathe deeper, feeling the transition. If plates die beneath one another here, what happens when continents meet head-on, neither willing to sink? When two giants collide, the earth does not swallow. It rises. Mountains are born. You rest now with the memory of subduction. Plates sliding beneath one another, crust swallowed into the earth, reborn in fire. But subduction is not the only story. Sometimes the plates that meet are too buoyant, too light to sink. When they collide, the earth cannot swallow. Instead, the crust rises. The ground itself folds, crumples, and pushes skyward. Mountains are born. Close your eyes and picture two vast continents drifting slowly toward one another. For millions of years, they travel across the surface of the earth like rafts on a molten sea. At last, their edges touch. Neither can die beneath the other. The force has nowhere to go but up. The land wrinkles like fabric pushed together. Peaks rise, valleys deepen, the crust thickens. A mountain range begins its slow ascent. The Himalayas are the most vivid example. Once, India was an island continent drifting northward across the Tethys Ocean. For tens of millions of years it moved, driven by the slow spreading of the seafloor behind it. At last, about 50 million years ago, it reached Asia. The collision has not stopped since. Even today, the Himalayas continue to rise as India presses into Eurasia. Mount Everest grows taller each year, pushed upward by the silent force of collision. You breathe softly, imagining the scale of this motion. To the human eye, mountains seem eternal, but they're alive, changing, reshaping. They grow not in moments, but in ages, lifted slowly as continents grind together. The stone beneath you is never still. Mountains are not smooth. They are jagged because they are young. Rain and wind have not yet worn them down. The Alps in Europe, the Rockies in North America, the Andes in South America, all are monuments to collision, peaks that pierce the sky where continents press together. They are the scars of impact, but also the symbols of renewal. You drift further, picturing the process in detail. Rocks fold under pressure, bending without breaking. Elsewhere, the crust fractures, thrusting slabs upward in great sheets. Faults stack layers of rock like pages of a book pushed out of place. What was once seafloor becomes mountaintop. Fossils of shells, corals, and ancient marine creatures are found high above the waves, carried to summits by the slow rise of stone. To walk among mountains is to walk upon an ancient ocean floor, now kissed by clouds. You breathe deeper, sensing the paradox of mountains. They are both young and ancient, young in their sharpness, their steep slopes, their restless growth. Ancient in the rocks that compose them, stones formed hundreds of millions of years before, now lifted into light. Each mountain is both newborn and elder, both fragile and eternal. Mountains shape more than land. They shape climate, rivers, life itself. As they rise, they block winds, redirect storms, capture rain. Rivers carve valleys from their slopes, carrying water to plains. The Himalayas feed the great rivers of Asia, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Yangtze, sustaining billions of people. The Andes give birth to the Amazon, the lifeblood of a rainforest. Mountains are not only monuments of collision, they are fountains of life. You pause here, resting in the rhythm of this thought. From the clash of continents comes not only upheaval, but abundance. The violence of collision gives rise to fertility, to rivers, to force, to civilizations nurtured by mountain streams. What seems like struggle is also creation. But mountains, too, are impermanent. Though they rise, they also fall. Rain, wind, ice, and time wear them down. Peaks crumble into valleys, valleys into plains. The Appalachians, once as tall as the Himalayas, are now gentle hills, softened by hundreds of millions of years of erosion. The balance continues. Uplift and erosion, creation and destruction, rise and fall. The restless earth does not stop, even at its highest points. The night deepens as you drift among these peaks in thought. You feel their silence, their weight, their patience. They remind you of time itself, slow, unyielding, vast beyond measure. To stand before them is to feel small, but also connected to the immensity of the planet. And still, even here, you sense the transition. Mountains rise when continents collide, but beneath them tension builds. Plates press, faults slip, energy gathers. Sometimes the silence of stone breaks suddenly, releasing its strain in shudders that travel through the earth. Mountains do not only rise, they also tremble. The story of collision leads onward to the story of earthquakes. You rest now among mountains, their sharp peaks rising where continents collide. They seem unmoving, timeless. Yet within them lies pressure, a quiet, invisible force gathering over centuries. Plates grind, bend, and lock, storing energy in silence. And then, suddenly, the silence breaks. The earth trembles, the ground ripples, and in that moment, you feel the truth. The planet whispers through earthquakes. Close your eyes and imagine two tectonic plates pressed against one another. For years, for lifetimes, they strain without movement, their edges gripping tightly. Stress builds like a bowstring pulled back. At last, the tension becomes too great. The plates slip. In a fraction of a second, the bowstring snaps, releasing energy that has waited for centuries. That release races through the crust as seismic waves. The ground that seems steady begins to ripple. Buildings sway, rivers slosh, mountains tremble. To stand in an earthquake is to feel the living body of Earth reveal itself. Sudden, powerful, unstoppable. You breathe deeply, remembering that earthquakes are not random. They follow the boundaries of plates, the scars of the restless skin. Along faults like California's San Andreas, two plates slide past each other, locking and breaking again and again. Along subduction zones, one plate dive beneath another, unleashing quakes of immense strength. The Himalayas, too, tremble, shaken by the force of their ongoing collision. Wherever plates meet, earthquakes are born. The waves of an earthquake spread in layers. First come the P waves, compressions moving quickly, like sound traveling through stone. Then the slower S waves, shaking side to side. Finally, surface waves roll outward, lifting and dropping the ground like waves upon an ocean. Each type of wave tells a different story of energy released, of the planet's pulse echoing through its crust. You pause here, letting the rhythm of waves flow through your imagination. Earthquakes are violent, but they are also music, vibrations of the Earth's body, resonating across stone. Seismographs, delicate instruments, record this music, drawing lines that mark each tremor. Through them, scientists read the whispers of the planet, learning where energy hides, how deep faults lie, how the Earth breathes. Yet earthquakes remind us of fragility. Cities rise upon land that may one day tremble. Lives unfold atop faults hidden beneath soil. Entire civilizations have been shaped by quakes. Ancient temples toppled, coastlines reshaped, rivers redirected. In 1755, Lisbon shook so fiercely that the city burned and waves swept its harbor. In 1906, San Francisco was torn by fire after the ground split. In 2010, Haiti trembled, its capital shattered in moments. These events remind us that the earth beneath our feet is not solid. It is alive with motion. But earthquakes are not only destruction, they are also revelation. Through their waves, we have learned the structure of the earth. Seismic vibrations travel differently through liquid and solid, slow through soft rock, fast through dense stone. By studying them, scientists discover the Earth's inner core, its molten outer core, its layered mantle. Without quakes, much of the planet's interior would remain unknown. In their violence, They have given us knowledge. You breathe into this paradox. Earthquakes unsettle, yet they teach. They frighten, yet they reveal. They are sudden, yet they are part of the slow cycle of tectonics, part of the planet's endless balance of tension and release. Imagine the ground as a great drum. Most of the time it is silent. But when pressure grows too strong, the drum beats, vibrating in waves across the world. Sometimes the beats are small, tremors felt only faintly. Sometimes they are massive, reshaping landscapes. But all are the same truth. The ground is never fully still. The night deepens as you reflect on this. You rest in the knowledge that earthquakes, though unpredictable in the moment, are inevitable in the long rhythm of the earth. They remind us that stillness is an illusion, that motion is everywhere, even when unseen. And so, this chapter closes with calm acceptance. Earthquakes are whispers of the restless planet, sudden breaths of energy released from ages of silence. To live here is to share the body of a world that trembles, that speaks in vibrations, that never ceases to move. You rest now with the whispers of earthquakes still in your mind. The earth has shown you its tension, its sudden release, the tremors that remind you it is alive. But earthquakes are only part of the story of boundaries. Where plates meet and grind, where the skin of the earth tears and bends, fire often rises. From beneath the crust, molten rock escapes, breaking to the surface as volcanoes. Fiery mountains at the edges of the world. Close your eyes and picture the planet's interior. Beneath the thin crust lies the mantle, hot and slowly flowing, like honey under pressure. In some places, the mantle melts into magma, glowing with heat, shimmering with energy. That magma rises, pushed upward through cracks and weaknesses in the crust. When it reaches the surface, it erupts as lava, ash, gas, and flame. Volcanoes are the planet's vents, its breath of fire. They release pressure, recycle crust, and remind us that beneath the illusion of stability lies a restless furnace. You drift into the image of a volcano rising from the sea. The island of Hawaii began this way, built from eruptions over millions of years. Layer upon layer of lava cooled into rock, rising above the ocean until mountains formed. Mauna Loa, the largest of them, is taller than Everest when measured from its base on the seafloor. To look upon it is to see fire made solid, time piled into stone. Elsewhere, volcanoes form its subduction zones. As plates sink, water carried into the mantle melts rock, fueling chains of volcanoes along arcs. The Andes, the Cascades, Japan, Indonesia, all are born in this process. The ring of fire circles the Pacific, dotted with volcanoes like glowing beads, each a testament to subduction's fiery gift. Volcanoes can be gentle or violent. Some erupt quietly, pouring rivers of lava that move slowly across land. Others explode with fury, sending ash into the sky, shaking the earth with force. Mount St. Helens in 1980 blew away its summit in seconds, reshaping the mountain. Krakatoa in 1883 erupted so violently that its sound was heard thousands of kilometers away, and its ash darkened skies around the world. And yet, from destruction comes renewal. Lava, once cooled, forms fertile soils rich in minerals. Around volcanoes, crops thrive, forests grow, life flourishes. The same eruption that burns also nourishes. Civilizations have lived in the shadows of volcanoes for this reason. Risk balanced by abundance. Naples beneath Vesuvius, Java with its fertile fields, the Andes with their terraced farms. Fire brings life as much as danger. You breathe deeply, sensing this paradox. Volcanoes are both endings and beginnings, symbols of death and rebirth. Their eruptions destroy, but their soils sustain. Their ash blocks sunlight, but also enriches earth. To rest near them is to live close to both danger and abundance, to accept the cycle of creation through destruction. Volcanoes also shape the planet's climate. Eruptions release gases into the air, carbon dioxide that warms, sulfur dioxide that cools. Some eruptions change weather for years, veiling the sun with ash. In 1815, Tambarai erupted, causing the year without a summer. Crops failed, skies dimmed, and the world remembered that the breath of earth can touch every life. You pause here, feeling the scale of this connection. A single mountain, erupting in fire, can influence the entire planet's climate. Volcanoes are not only local events, they are global actors, linking the crust of the air, the mantle to the sky. And beneath the surface, volcanoes remind us of the mantle's endless motion. They are windows into the deep, hints of the heat and energy driving plate tectonics. To see lava is to glimpse the Earth's inner life, flowing and glowing beneath your feet. The night deepens as you imagine volcanoes not as threats, but as voices. Each eruption is the planet speaking, releasing pressure, reshaping surface, reminding life of its source. They are fire at the boundaries, but also continuity, the heartbeat of a restless world. The chapter softens now, inviting you to rest in the glow of these fiery mountains. You do not fear them here. You accept their duality, destroyers and creators, endings and beginnings. You breathe with their rhythm. Fire turned to soil, soil feeding life, life rising again. And as you drift, you sense the next story forming. If plates create mountains, tremble with quakes, and breathe fire, then surely they also drift across the globe. Continents are not fixed. They wander, collide, separate, and join again in a long dance. That is where the story flows next. You rest now with the memory of volcanoes, their fiery breath shaping land, feeding soil, reminding you the Earth's restless interior. But beyond fire and trembling lies an even greater motion, a motion so slow you cannot feel it, so vast you cannot see it in a lifetime, yet powerful enough to redraw the face of the world. This is the drift of continents, the endless dance across Earth's surface. Close your eyes and picture the continents as rafts, floating upon the mantle's slow currents. They move not with haste, but with patience, slipping across the planet at the speed your fingernails grow. Yet over millions of years, these small steps become journeys of epic scale. Mountains rise, oceans open, climates shift, ecosystems evolve, all from the slow wandering of land across a molten sea. Long ago, all the continents you know were joined together. Around 300 million years ago, they formed a single massive landmass, Pangaea. Imagine it, one giant continent stretching from pole to pole, surrounded by a vast global ocean. Forests spread across its interior, deserts stretched wide, reptiles and early mammals wandered its plains. But Pangaea was not forever. Beneath it, the restless mantle tugged and tore. Around 200 million years ago, cracks formed, rifts widened, and the great continent began to split apart. You drift with this memory of breaking. First, the Atlantic Ocean opened, pulling apart the Americas from Europe and Africa. India broke away, racing north toward Asia. Australia drifted from Antarctica, moving northward into new seas. Over time, the world you know emerged, separate continents, familiar coastlines, vast oceans between them. The dance that tore apart Pangaea continues even now. Imagine standing on a beach in South America, looking east across the Atlantic. On the other side, Africa lies waiting. The two continents were once one, their coastlines fitting like puzzle pieces. Fossils and rocks tell the story. Identical species found on both sides of the ocean, mountains that match across the divide. The sea that now separates them is young, born of drifting plates. And still, the Atlantic grows wider each year, its seafloor spreading, its coasts drifting apart. You breathe softly, realizing that continents are not fixed. They wander like dancers, sometimes joining, sometimes parting. Over hundreds of millions of years, supercontinents form and break apart again in cycles. Pangaea was not the first. Before it came Rodinia, even earlier Columbia. In the far future, another supercontinent will form, perhaps Pangaea Proxima, perhaps Amasia, perhaps some other shape not yet imagined. The continents will join once more, then drift apart again. The dance of continents shapes more than land. It changes oceans, climates, and life itself. When land gathers in supercontinents, the interiors become dry, far from ocean winds. Deserts spread. When continents separate, new coastlines form, bringing moisture and life. Mountain ranges rise as continents collide, redirecting winds and rivers. Ocean currents shift, carrying warmth or cold to different parts of the world. Entire ecosystems adapt, evolve, and vanish as continents drift. You pause, breathing into this awareness. The dinosaurs rose and fell as continents split apart. Mammals spread as land connected and disconnected. Humans, too, are children of this dance, walking across land bridges exposed when sea levels shifted with continental drift. Our history is written on a stage that is always moving. The night deepens as you imagine the continents not as static land, but as slow dancers circling across the globe. North America drifting westward, Africa turning slowly north, India pressing still into Asia, raising the Himalayas higher each year. Their pace is too slow for your eyes, but their journey shapes every horizon, and still you feel calm. For this dance is steady, ancient, patient. It does not rush, it does not pause. It continues whether you watch or not, whether life flourishes or fades. It is a heartbeat of deep time, a rhythm measured not in years but in millions of years. The chapter quiets here, inviting you to rest with the image of drifting continents. They are dancers on a restless stage, their motion shaping the world you inherit. You need not hurry to follow them. Their pace is gentle, their rhythm eternal. You float with them, carried by the slowest waltz of all, and as you drift, you sense the next story waiting. If the dance of continents shapes oceans and mountains, it must also shape air and water, climates and ecosystems. The drifting land is not only geology, it is life itself. You rest now with the memory of drifting continents. You've seen them slide across the globe, joining and parting, weaving oceans and mountains in their patient dance. But the story of tectonics is not only about stone and water, it is also about air, weather, and life itself. For as plates move, they shape the climate. And as climate shifts, life adapts, evolves, and transforms. Close your eyes and imagine a mountain range rising where two plates collide. The Himalayas, newly lifted, tower into the sky. Their height blocks winds, redirecting currents of air. Moisture carried from the ocean falls as rain on one side, feeding rivers and forests. On the far side, the air is dry, creating vast deserts. The mountains are not only peaks of stone, they are walls that shape climate for entire continents. The Andes tell the same story. As South America collides with the Nazca Plate, the range rises, forming a spine along the continent's edge. On its eastern slopes, the Amazon rainforest flourishes, fed by rains carried across the mountains. On its western side, the Atacama Desert lies in silence, one of the driest places on Earth. The difference is not chance. It is tectonics shaping life through climate. You breathe softly, recognizing how deeply geology and life are woven together. The restless crust directs winds, redirects water, and with it, determines where forests grow, where grasslands spread, where deserts expand. Mountains are climate makers, sculpting ecosystems across the world. But tectonics shapes more than mountains. As continents drift, they alter ocean currents. Picture the Atlantic closing, the Pacific widening. As the shapes of oceans change, so do the paths of water, the flows of warmth and cold that regulate Earth's temperature. When South America connected with North America 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama formed, closing the seaway between the Atlantic and Pacific. Ocean currents shifted. The Gulf Stream strengthened, carrying warmth northward, fueling ice ages in Europe. A narrow strip of land, born of drifting plates, altered the rhythm of climate for the entire planet. You drift further back in time. When continents gathered near the poles, ice caps spread, reflecting sunlight, cooling the planet. When continents spread near the equator, warmth increased, forests expanded, life flourished. The dance of continents is also the dance of ice and fire, of cooling and warming, of deserts and rainforests. Life responds to every shift. As climates change, species move, adapt, or vanish. When the Himalayas rose, monsoons grew stronger, reshaping ecosystems across Asia. When Antarctica drifted over the South Pole, it froze into ice, cutting off warmth and reshaping ocean currents. Life that once thrived in warmth adapted to cold or disappeared. The fossil record is a map of these changes, each layer of stone, recording species rising and falling with the pulse of tectonics. You breathe deeper, sensing the patience of the story. Evolution itself has been guided by the restless plates. The dinosaurs rose in warm, sprawling continents. Mammals spread after climate shifted, forests turned to grasslands, oceans closed and opened. Even humans owe their path to tectonics. The Rift Valley of Africa, born of stretching plates, created varied landscapes, forests, grasslands, lakes. In that diversity, our ancestors learned to adapt, to walk upright, to migrate. The restless earth is written into our very bodies. The night deepens as you imagine the cycles of climate. Ice ages come and go. Deserts bloom and retreat. Rainforests expand and shrink. Each change is linked to the plates, drifting, colliding, reshaping winds and waters. The crust of the earth is a stage, and climate is the play it directs, with life as the actors adapting to every scene. And yet, the story is not only past. The continents still move. Africa drifts north, pressing into Europe. The Himalayas rise higher. The Pacific shrinks, the Atlantic widens. The climates of tomorrow will be shaped by the same forces, slow but inevitable. Life will respond, as it always has, with adaptation, migration, and renewal. You pause here, letting the calm of this truth settle. The connection between stone, air, water, and life is not fragile. It is enduring, woven through time. Every ecosystem, every creature, every forest and desert is part of the same slow rhythm, the beat of tectonics shaping climate, climate shaping life. The chapter softens, inviting you into reflection. You are not separate from this rhythm. Your breath, your food, your home are all shaped by the slow movement of plates. Rivers flow from mountains. Soils form from volcanic ash. Climates are guided by drifting land. You are part of this story, carried on the same restless earth as every creature before you. And as you drift deeper, you sense the next step. If tectonics has shaped life through climate, how do we know? What evidence tells the story? The rocks, the fossils, the magnetic patterns, all whisper the proof of plates. The journey leads onward, from the influence of climate to the evidence beneath our feet. You rest now with a memory of drifting continents shaping climate and life. The slow dance of land has guided winds and rains, forests and deserts, even the path of evolution itself. But how do we know this story? How do we trace movements too slow for any human eye, changes too vast for memory? The answers lie beneath your feet, in rocks, fossils, and the patterns of the seafloor. The earth records its history, patiently, layer by layer, waiting for us to listen. Close your eyes and picture the seafloor spreading at a ridge. Molten rock rises, cools, and hardens. As it cools, tiny crystals of iron within the rock align with Earth's magnetic field, like compass needles frozen in stone. Over time, the planet's magnetic field reverses. North becomes south, south becomes north. Each reversal is recorded in new rock at the ridge, leaving stripes of opposite polarity. When scientists mapped the seafloor, they found these magnetic stripes mirrored on either side of ridges, a perfect pattern of spreading. The crust itself told the story. The oceans are opening, the plates are moving. You breathe softly, marveling at this natural recording. The earth writes its history in magnetism, hidden in stone, revealed only with patience. It is a reminder that even the invisible, the pull of Earth's field, leaves its mark if you know how to look. But the evidence does not end at sea. Fossils, too, whisper the truth. Imagine a fern fossil found in South America, identical to one in Africa. How could the same plant exist on continents now separated by an ocean? Or the bones of ancient reptiles, scattered across lands now thousands of kilometers apart? The puzzle makes sense only when you place the continents back together, their edges fitting neatly, their fossils aligning. Life itself is evidence of drifting land. Rocks tell the story as well. Mountain ranges now split across continents, once formed as single belts. The Appalachians in North America match mountains in Scotland and Norway, pieces of the same chain broken apart when the Atlantic opened. Their layers and minerals align, testifying to an ancient union. To walk those mountains is to step on fragments of a larger whole, broken by time, carried apart by drifting plates. Sediments on the seafloor add another voice. Near ridges, they are thin, freshly formed. Farther away, they grow thicker, built from millions of years of accumulation. The pattern is exact. The farther from the ridge, the older the crust. The seafloor is a timeline, stretching outward from its birthplace. Each grain of sediment is a marker of age, a measure of drift. You pause here, letting the weight of this evidence settle gently. The Earth has given us clues everywhere, in its magnetism, in its fossils, in its mountains and sediments. Together, they form a chorus of proof. The theory of plate tectonics is not imagination. It is written in stone, in patterns repeated across the globe. The night deepens as you imagine scientists piecing these clues together. At first, the idea of moving continents seemed absurd. Land felt too solid, too permanent. But each discovery added weight. Fossils that matched, rocks that aligned, magnetic stripes that mirrored. Slowly, the picture grew clear. The continents do not stand still. The plates move, recycle, collide, and drift. The surface of the Earth is alive. You breathe into the calm of this realization. To know the Earth story is to see that nothing is truly fixed. What feels immovable, mountains, continents, oceans, is in fact always changing. The evidence beneath your feet is a reminder of impermanence, of cycles larger than lifetimes, of motion hidden beneath stillness. The chapter quiets as you imagine walking across land, each step placed upon stone that carries memory. Beneath your feet lies a record of time. Fossils that tell of vanished seas, rocks that tell of vanished mountains, magnetic fields frozen in lava flows. The Earth remembers everything. All we must do is listen. And as you drift deeper, you sense the story nearing its close. The evidence tells us the past, but also points to the future. The plates will continue to move. The crust will continue to recycle. The surface will continue to change. The restless Earth never ends. The final step is to rest in this endless renewal, to find peace in a planet that is always remaking itself. You rest now with the voices of evidence beneath your feet. Fossils, rocks, magnetic stripes, sediments, each one whispering the truth of a restless Earth. Together, they have shown you a story of movement, of cycles, of creation and destruction woven as one. Now, as the journey closes, you drift into final truth. The Earth renews itself endlessly. Close your eyes and picture the crust of the Earth as a great circle. At one edge, new crust is born at spreading ridges, rising from molten depths to form mountains beneath the sea. At another edge, old crust sinks back into mantle, swallowed at subduction zones. In between, continents collide, mountains rise, earthquakes tremble, volcanoes breathe. It is all one motion, a cycle without beginning and without end. Like breath, the Earth inhales and exhales. Oceans open, then close. Continents gather, then drift apart. Mountains rise, then erode into plains. Volcanoes erupt, then quiet into fertile valleys. Every ending is a beginning. Every destruction is also creation. The planet never sleeps. You breathe slowly with this rhythm. Imagine the Atlantic widening, as it does now. Imagine the Pacific shrinking, as it sinks into trenches. Millions of years from now, the map of Earth will be unrecognizable. A new supercontinent will form. New oceans will open. The face of the world will change again, as it has countless times before. And yet, the renewal is not only in stone. It is also in life. As mountains rise, they redirect rivers, creating new ecosystems. As climates shift, species adapt, evolve, transform. As continents join and separate, life migrates, mixes, diversifies. The endless renewal of the crust is also the endless renewal of life itself. You pause, resting in the patience of the cycle. Human time feels short against it. A century, a millennium, even 10,000 years are only moments in the dance of plates. Mountains rise and fall across spans longer than civilization. Oceans open and close in the silence of millions of years. To live here is to be a guest in a story far greater than yourself. But this does not diminish you. Instead, it comforts you. For though the Earth is restless, it is also steady. Its cycles do not stop. Its renewal does not fail. Even as landscapes change, the rhythm continues. You are carried in the same breath that has carried every creature, every forest, every sea before you. The night deepens as you imagine the Earth not as fragile, but as enduring. It has been broken and remade countless times. It has faced fire and ice, collision and drift. Yet always it continues, always it renews. To rest upon it is to rest upon resilience itself. And so, the journey ends in peace. You began with the restless skin, learned of oceans opening and closing, of subduction swallowing, of mountains rising, of earthquakes trembling, of volcanoes breathing, of continents drifting, of climates shifting, of evidence whispering. And now you see the whole, a planet alive with motion, forever remaking itself, forever renewing. You drift into sleep with this thought. The earth will continue long after you, long after all that you know. And yet, you are part of it now. Your breath, your steps, your life are threads woven into its living fabric. You rest in the embrace of a planet that never sleeps, and in its endless renewal, you find calm. You breathe in slowly. And as you do, you picture the vast blue of the Pacific Ocean stretching before you, so wide that it covers nearly half the planet. A mirror sky that seems endless, yet beneath its calm surface lies one of the most restless places on Earth, a circle of fire where tectonic plates meet in constant tension, where volcanoes erupt and earthquakes shudder, where the land is reshaped and the sea itself feels alive. For this is the Ring of Fire, a necklace of mountains and trenches, volcanoes, and faults that girdle the Pacific, and its presence does more than shape stone. It shapes the very climate, guiding currents, stirring winds, and influencing weather across the globe. And as you let your imagination drift, you see the edges of this ocean glowing faintly, continents rimmed with mountains born of subduction, where ocean crust dives beneath lighter land, melting into magma that rises, erupting as fire, and you realize that this ceaseless activity is not chaos, but part of a rhythm, part of the Earth's own circulation of heat and motion. You think of Japan, of the islands of Indonesia, of the Andes along South America's coast, of the Cascades in North America, all born of this restless edge, their peaks alive with volcanic breath, their soils fertile with ash, their climates shaped by the very stone beneath them. You picture the trenches, too, deep scars where the seafloor sinks, places like the Mariana Trench, so deep the tallest mountain on Earth could sink within it unseen, and you sense that these depths guide the circulation of the ocean, channeling currents that carry warmth and cold across basins, steering storms and rains above. You realize that the Pacific is not only the largest ocean, but also the most influential on the world's climate. For within its expanse, winds and waters interact in patterns that echo far beyond its shores, in cycles called El Niño and La Nina, born of changes in surface temperature and winds, pulses that ripple outward to shift rains in Africa, droughts in Australia, storms in the Americas, showing how the breath of one ocean can be felt across the entire globe. You imagine warm water piling up in the western Pacific, driven by trade winds, feeding typhoons and monsoons, while the east lies cooler, its upwelling waters rich with nutrients that sustain vast fisheries. And then in an El Niño year, you see the winds weaken, the warm waters slosh eastward, the rains follow, deserts flood, fields parch, storms rage in places unaccustomed, and you feel how fragile and powerful this balance is, how a change in the Pacific's heartbeat alters the weather of the world. You think of La Nina, the opposite phase, when trade winds strengthen, cold waters rise along the South American coast, rains shift again, and the climates of continents adjust in response. And you understand that this pattern, this Pacific oscillation, is not an isolated event, but a reflection of the ocean's dialogue with tectonics, for the shape of the Pacific Basin, the placement of islands and continents, the depth of trenches, all are products of plate motion, and without them, the rhythm would be different. The world's climate another story altogether. You breathe into this awareness, and you feel comfort in the steadiness of the pattern, even as it shifts between phases. For though the Pacific is restless, its cycles are ancient, part of the larger fabric of Earth's climate. You imagine standing on a Pacific shore, waves lapping softly, and knowing that the tide you hear is connected to storms thousands of kilometers away, to winds that travel across the basin, to the slow churn of currents that circle the globe. And beneath those waters lies the fire of volcanoes, the tremor of faults, the hidden engine of stone and heat. You see the islands at the Pacific, many born of volcanoes that rose from the seafloor, their peaks reaching sunlight, their soils hosting forests and cultures, gifts of tectonic fire. And you remember that even Hawaii, isolated in the center of the ocean, was born from a hotspot plume rising from deep within the mantle, and as the Pacific plate drifts across it, new islands form in a chain that stretches like a timeline across the sea. You begin to sense the Pacific as both restless and nurturing, destructive in its quakes and eruptions, yet life-giving in the rains and fertile soils it creates, its fire and water in constant dialogue. You let your thoughts sink deeper to the idea that this ring of fire, this restless edge, is not only shaping the present but also storing the future. For every eruption releases gases that alter the balance of carbon. Every uplifted mountain changes winds and rains. Every trench guides currents that steer storms. And so the Pacific's fire is also a whisper in the climate's long rhythm. You picture the Earth as a breathing body again, and you see the Pacific as its great chest, expanding and contracting with tectonic motion. Its fire the heartbeat, its currents the veins, its rains the exhalation. You rest in that vision, and as you rest, you feel the slow drift of the continents around it, knowing that even this vast ocean will one day close, consumed as plates converge, its fire giving way to new mountains, its climate influence transformed, and you sense the continuity of the cycle. You let your breath fall softer, and you begin to look southward toward the lonely continent at the bottom of the world, Antarctica, whose story is another turning point, for when it drifted to the pole and the Southern Ocean circled it, the climate of Earth shifted forever, and so, gently, you drift toward the next chapter, toward the southern continent's secrets. You let your breath grow calm, steady as falling snow, and as it steadies you begin to feel the pull of the far south, where a vast white land lies in silence, surrounded by dark waters that circle endlessly, a continent both ancient and lonely, a continent whose drifting to the pole and whose isolation by ocean currents change the climate of the Earth forever, for this is Antarctica, the southern continent, keeper of secrets carved in ice, its story written not only in glaciers but in the motions of tectonic plates that carried it from warmer latitudes to its present frozen throne, and as your mind softens into vision, you picture it long ago, before it was sheathed in ice, when forests covered its land, when dinosaurs wandered its valleys, when rivers ran across its surface. For Antarctica was once joined to other continents in Gondwana, part of a vast southern land that stretched across the planet. But as tectonics pulled Gondwana apart, Antarctica began to drift southward, carried slowly, steadily, until it reached the pole, and in that migration lay the beginning of its transformation. You imagine the moment when the last connections broke, when the Drake Passage opened between South America and Antarctica, when the Tasman Gateway widened between Antarctica and Australia, and through these openings the Southern Ocean was born, a circumpolar current that circles Antarctica endlessly, isolating it from the warmth of other seas, sealing it in cold, and in that isolation ice spread, glaciers advanced, and a continent of forest became a continent of ice. You realize that tectonics did not simply place Antarctica at the pole, but also gave it the ocean moat that keeps it frozen, a current so strong it blocks warm waters from reaching its shores. And in doing so, it cooled not only Antarctica, but the entire planet, changing sea levels, altering winds, shifting climates in Africa, Asia, and beyond. You let your imagination linger on the ice itself, mile-thick sheets covering land, pressing down stone, storing most of the world's fresh water, and you sense that this ice is not just a passive blanket, but an active force, reflecting sunlight back into space, amplifying the chill, influencing ocean circulation as its meltwaters flow into the sea, guiding the great conveyor itself. You picture the katabatic winds, cold and relentless, rushing down from the plateau, sculpting the air, feeding the Southern Ocean storms, showing how even the silence of ice creates motion in the atmosphere. You think of the fossils buried beneath that ice, leaves, wood, and bones that tell a warmer past, proof that this frozen land was once green, and you realize that the continent holds memories of climates long gone, written in ice cores that trap bubbles of air, tiny time capsules that let us hear the breath of Earth from hundreds of thousands of years ago, teaching us how carbon, temperature, and life have shifted in rhythm. You let your mind wander to mountains buried beneath ice, hidden ranges that rival the Alps, secret valleys untouched by warmth for millions of years, and you understand that even in its silence, Antarctica holds landscapes unseen, secrets still waiting to be uncovered. You feel awe at how one continent could shift the balance of the entire planet simply by drifting south, how its placement sealed Earth into its modern cycle of ice ages, how its frozen presence became a fulcrum for global climate. You think of the penguins on its coasts, of the whales in its surrounding seas, of the krill that swarm in its cold waters, And you realize that even here, life thrives, adapted to the cold, dependent on the upwelling currents stirred by winds and ice, life that is part of the global chain linking oceans, continents, and skies. You let this vision sink in, and you begin to feel that Antarctica's secrets are not only the past but the future, for as the planet warms, its ice melts, its glaciers retreat, its seas rise, and once again the balance of the world shifts, reminding you that tectonics place it here, but its ice continues to shape what is yet to come. You breathe gently into that awareness, knowing that the continent is both timeless and fragile, steady and changing, a reminder that the Earth's climate is always in motion, sculpted by stone and sea alike. And as your thoughts drift northward, you begin to sense the next chapter in the story. For the southern continent's secrets lie in its frozen isolation. Then the north holds another tale, a story of warmth carried across the Atlantic, of currents that shaped Europe's gentle climates and plunged the planet into ice ages. And so you find yourself drifting toward that story, toward the North Atlantic's long memory. You breathe deeply, and as your breath slows, you begin to feel the pull of the North Atlantic, that stretch of ocean that lies between continents, connecting the warmth of the tropics to the chill of the Arctic. And within its waters you send a memory older than nations, older than people, a memory of ice and warmth, of currents that have carried heat across millennia, shaping the climates of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. For the North Atlantic is more than a sea. It is a keeper of Earth's long climate memory, a place where the great conveyor of ocean circulation dives deep, where warm waters from the south rise to meet the cold of the north, sink, and begin journeys through the deep ocean that last for centuries, journeys that link equator to pole, surface to abyss, past to future. You imagine the Gulf Stream flowing northward, a ribbon of warmth carried across the Atlantic, delivering gentle winters and soft rains to Europe, making lands fertile that, without its touch, would be frozen and barren. And you realize that this current, this silent gift, is not an accident but the product of tectonics, of the Atlantic Ocean itself, born when Pangea split apart and the continents drifted wide, opening a basin through which heat could travel, a basin that became the stage for the conveyor's long pulse. You picture Greenland, its vast ice sheet looming over the sea, and you sense how it too plays a role, feeding fresh water into the ocean as glaciers melt, lightening the surface, threatening to slow the sinking of currents, reminding you that the North Atlantic's memory is delicate, that its rhythm depends on a precise balance of salt and heat, a balance written by tectonic placement, yet vulnerable to change. You think of the last ice age, when the Atlantic circulation weakened, when massive ice sheets melted and released torrents of fresh water, disrupting the conveyor, plunging regions into sudden cold even as others warmed, showing how quickly the climate can shift when the memory of the North Atlantic is disturbed. You drift back further, to times when the Atlantic was young, its currents only beginning to form, its role in climate still emerging, and you realize that the drift of continents has not only changed the face of maps, but the very way the ocean breathes. You let your imagination picture Europe without the Gulf Stream, its fields frozen, its cities shrouded in snow, and you understand that entire cultures, histories, and futures have been guided by this invisible flow, by warmth carried northward because of the ocean's shape. You sense that this is why the North Atlantic is said to have a long memory. It stores changes in its depths, releases them over centuries, and carries the imprint of tectonics in every wave and current. You picture the North Atlantic oscillation, the shifting of atmospheric pressure that works with ocean currents to steer storms, deciding whether winters are mild or severe, rains abundant or scarce. And you see how this too is part of the ocean's memory, a pattern echoing through decades, felt in fields, forests, and rivers. You think of how scientists drill ice cores in Greenland, how they read bubbles of ancient air, how those bubbles record abrupt climate shifts tied to conveyor, and you realize that the North Atlantic not only holds memory, but reveals it, offering glimpses of how stone, water, and air together write the story of Earth. You let this awareness soften into calm, knowing that though the currents shift, though ice melts and reforms, the ocean's rhythm is steady in its vast patience, a patience that dwarfs human time yet enfolds it. You breathe with it, steady, rhythmic, a comfort in its persistence, and you feel awe how tectonics, by opening this ocean, created a memory that now shapes your world. You rest in that thought, and as you rest, your mind begins to drift forward, to the shallow seas that once spread across continents, seas that carried warmth into the heart of lands, seas that fostered life and biodiversity, Seas that remind you that the ocean's influence is not only in deep currents and polar ice, but also in the quiet flooding of low-lying lands, in the shallow waters that once shimmer where now there is stone. And so you let yourself drift onward, toward the next chapter, toward the story of shallow seas. You breathe slowly, and as you breathe, you imagine the land beneath you not as solid ground, but as something that once lay beneath water. For throughout Earth's history, shallow seas have spread across continents, vast inland waters that shimmered in sunlight, covering plains with warmth and life. And though today they are gone, their memory lingers in stone and fossils, in layers of limestone and chalk that whisper of ancient oceans. And as you let your mind sink into this vision, you see that these shallow seas, though gentle in depth, were powerful in influence, shaping climate, fostering biodiversity, and leaving marks that endure in the landscapes you walk upon. You picture the Cretaceous interior seaway, stretching across North America more than 80 million years ago, splitting the continent into eastern and western lands, a warm, shallow ocean filled with ammonites, mosasaurs, and fish, its waters carrying heat far inland, softening climates, greening shores. And you realize that its very existence was a gift of tectonics, of continents stretched and sagging as plates shifted, of sea levels rising in times of warmth, of basins opening where crust bent and allowed the ocean to flood the land. You drift further back, to the Paleozoic, when shallow epicontinental seas spread across Laurentia, when coral reefs flourish in warm equatorial waters that covered much of what is now North America, Europe, and Asia, seas that became cradles of life, fostering explosions of biodiversity, filling the sediments with shells that in time hardened into limestone cliffs that still stand today, reminders that stone itself can be born of shallow seas. You sense how these seas moderated climate, their waters absorbing heat in summer, releasing in winter, creating stability in regions that would otherwise swing between extremes. And you see how the flooding and retreat of shallow seas were part of long rhythms, linked to plate motion, to the rise and fall of sea levels, to the clustering and drifting of continents. You realize that shallow seas were more than temporary oceans. They were bridges, pathways for species to spread across lands, corridors of migration, nurseries of diversity, and in their warmth life thrive in ways that deep oceans could not match. You think of the chalk of Dover, gleaming white cliffs built from the remains of tiny plankton that lived in shallow seas of the Cretaceous, their shells of calcium carbonate settling into thick beds that became monuments to time, and you realize that every grain of chalk, every limestone block, is a fossilized breath of shallow sea, a fragment of a vanished world. You let your imagination picture standing in such a sea, the water clear and sunlit, fish darting through reefs, gentle waves lapping against the edges of a continent, and you feel the comfort of its warmth, the richness of its life. You think of how shallow seas capture carbon, locking it into sediments, regulating climate over millions of years, another way in which tectonics, by opening and closing basins, guided the planet's breath. You see that when continents split apart, new shallow seas often form along their edges, rift basins flooding with ocean, while when continents collided, shallow seas retreated, squeezed away by uplifted land, proving again that tectonics decides where oceans may enter and where they must leave. You breathe into the patience of this story, knowing that though today's continents seem fixed, tomorrow's may once again host shallow seas, as sea levels rise or fall, as land is stretched or broken. You sense the fragility of shallow seas, too, how easily they vanish when climates cool or seas retreat, leaving behind fossils and sediments as quiet reminders, and yet in their brief existence they shape entire eras, creating conditions that ripple through life and climate alike. You imagine the present world, with shallow seas mostly gone, yet their memory alive in the rocks beneath your feet, in the oil and gas formed from ancient sediments, in the cliffs and valleys carved from limestone, and you feel all that landscape so familiar are built from vanished oceans. You rest in this vision, and as you rest you begin to sense another force tied to shallow seas, the role of volcanoes, of eruptions that sometimes fill these basins with ash, of gases released that alter climate in sudden bursts, reminding you that alongside the gentle seas, the fiery breath of tectonics has always been present, shaping warmth and cold, adding to the rhythms of balance. And so your thoughts drift forward, from seas that whispered of life to the fire that sometimes silenced it, from gentle waters to the subtle tug of volcanoes, those powerful yet patient voices of the earth that breathe gases into the sky and leave their imprint not only on stone but on air itself. And you find yourself carried softly toward the next chapter, toward the story of volcanoes as climate's hidden hands. You breathe slowly, and as your breath steadies, you begin to feel the quiet power of volcanoes, those fiery mountains that rise where plates diverge or collide, where hot plumes pierce the crust, where Earth's hidden heat escapes into the sky. And though eruptions may seem violent and sudden, in truth they are also patient and subtle, shaping not only the landscapes of stone, but the very climate of the planet, tugging at the balance of warmth and cold, sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically, their influence stretching far beyond the moment of fire. And as you let your mind soften into this vision, you picture eruption, molten rock glowing, ash rising high into the atmosphere, gases spreading into the winds, and you realize that what escapes in the depths is not only lava, but also carbon dioxide, sulfur, and water vapor, breath of the mantle exhaled into the sky, breath that alters how sunlight enters or leaves the earth. You imagine fine ash and sulfur particles drifting into the stratosphere, scattering light, dimming the sun, cooling the surface for months or years, as happened after Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, leading to the year without a summer, when crops failed across continents, rivers froze in June, and the climate of an entire year was shifted by a single burst of fire. You sense how delicate the atmosphere is, how a veil of particles can change the balance of warmth, showing that volcanoes, though local in eruption, are global in influence. You think of other eruptions like Krakatoa in 1883, its thunder heard across oceans, its ash painting sunsets crimson for years, its aerosols cooling the world by a degree, or Pinatubo in 1991, whose eruption lowered global temperatures for nearly 2 years, proof that volcanoes leave their fingerprints on the climate, cooling not only skies but oceans, shifting winds, altering rains. Yet you also think of the deeper time, when vast volcanic provinces, called flood basalts, release gases for tens of thousands of years, adding enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, warming the planet, tipping climates into hothouse states, and sometimes triggering mass extinctions, as with the Siberian traps 250 million years ago, whose eruptions may have driven the greatest extinction in Earth's history, altering oceans, skies, and life itself. You see that volcanoes pull both ways, sometimes cooling with ash and aerosols, sometimes warming with carbon, sometimes brief in influence, sometimes stretching across millions of years, and in this duality lies their subtle tug, their quiet power to shape climate's balance. You imagine the Pacific Ring of Fire, its countless volcanoes breathing in rhythm with subduction zones, exhaling gases that join the atmosphere's chemistry, guiding the long-term carbon cycle, balancing the drawdown of carbon by weathering with new exhalations of stone. And you realize that tectonics has tied volcanoes into the great regulation of climate, ensuring that Earth remains habitable across ages. You feel all that your own breath of carbon connects, in its smallest way, to these immense breaths of stone, that the air you breathe now may contain atoms once released from an eruption centuries ago, recycled through ocean and sky. You think of the beauty as well. The fertile soils left by volcanic ash, the lush forests that grow on cooled lava, the vineyards nourished by minerals born of fire, reminders that volcanoes are not only destroyers but creators, their influence not only on climate but on life. You let your imagination picture standing near a volcano, heat rising, the air smelling of sulfur, and you realize that even as it towers silently, it is part of the Earth's deep circulation, part of the story of balance. You sense the patience of volcanoes, too, their cycles of dormancy and eruption, their long intervals that remind you that the Earth does not measure time as you do, that its breath is slow, its tug subtle. You rest in the knowledge that every eruption, large or small, every whisper of gas, every drift of ash, joins the larger rhythm of the planet, contributing to the balance of warmth and cold. And as you rest, you begin to drift toward the thought of the future, for volcanoes have always been part of the Earth's rhythm. Then they will shape the climates of continents yet to come, influencing the supercontinents that will one day form, deciding whether new lands are drenched or parched, warm or cold. And so your thoughts move softly toward the next chapter, to the vision of continents yet to come, to the story of how tectonics will continue its patient drift, carrying lands into new shapes, and with them, new climates waiting to be born. You breathe slowly, and as you breathe, you begin to imagine the Earth not as it is now, with maps you know, borders you can trace, but as it will be millions of years into the future, when the continents you stand upon today will no longer rest in the same places, when oceans will have closed and new ones opened, when mountains will have risen from the sea and coastlines you recognize will be buried beneath waves. For tectonics does not rest, and the continents continue their long drift, silent but steady, moving a few centimeters each year, as patient as the growth of your nails, yet powerful enough across millions of years to redraw the face of the world. And in that drift lies the story of continents yet to come. You imagine the Atlantic Ocean, still widening today as North America drifts from Europe, but in time, its expansion may slow, its floor sinking once again into subduction zones, until one day the Atlantic closes, the continents that face one another now drawn together in embrace, and mountains rise where waters once lay, new ranges taller than the Alps, a collision that will reshape climates, redirect winds, and alter the very heartbeat of the ocean conveyor. You picture Pacific, vast and restless, its floor already sinking into trenches, its edges colliding in fire, and you realize that this ocean is destined to vanish, consumed by subduction, its closure gathering the continents around it into a new supercontinent, a landmass so immense it may stretch from pole to pole, altering the circulation of air and sea, creating deserts at its heart and storms along its edges, reshaping the climates of the world in ways no one alive today can imagine. You think of the possible names scientists whisper, Amasia, Pangea Proxima, Nova Pangaea, visions of the next supercontinent, each one a reflection of where the continents may drift, whether the Atlantic closes first, or the Pacific, whether Asia and the Americas collide across the north, or whether Africa drifts northward to seal the Mediterranean, pushing Europe into new mountains as high as the Himalayas. You feel awe at the patience of this process, at how continents, so immense and solid to you now, are in truth rafts upon the mantle, carried by forces you cannot see, shaping not only the land but the sky. You imagine standing in that distant future, where the heart of a new supercontinent lies dry and vast, deserts spreading where rains cannot reach, while along the coast storms pound and monsoons drench, and you realize that the placement of land will once again decide who receives abundance and who lives in drought, for tectonics writes the climate map of the future as surely as it has written the past. You think of Antarctica, perhaps drifting northward once again, its ice melting, its coast greening, while another land, drawn to the pole, freezes in its place, showing that even ice ages are guided by drift. You see Africa colliding with Europe, the Mediterranean vanishing, the Alps rising higher, deserts shifting as winds are redirected. You see the Americas drawn closer to Asia, perhaps sealing the Arctic Ocean, reshaping currents, and creating new climates in the northern hemisphere. You let your breath fall into this rhythm of drift, slow but inevitable, and you feel comfort in knowing that the earth is never still, that even the maps you hold dear are only temporary, sketches in a long and patient book of stone. You begin to sense that life itself will adapt, as it always has, migrating with new climates, evolving into new forms, carry along with the continents as they drift. You let this awareness soothe you. The future is vast beyond your lifetime, yet within the planet's patient breath it is already written, already unfolding. You realize, too, that the supercontinent cycles are not only about land, but about climate balance itself. For when lands gather, the interior is dry, deserts expand, carbon is drawn down differently, and ice may struggle to grow. When they scatter, oceans spread warmth more evenly, climate stabilizes, and biodiversity flourishes. The Earth swings between these states, each cycle preparing new rhythms, new balances. You rest in that thought. And as you rest, you begin to feel the continuity of the story. For if continents yet to come will shape climates in new ways, then perhaps the deepest rhythm of all is not in the maps themselves, but in the cycles of time they mark, cycles that remind you that change is constant, that stillness is only an illusion. And so you breathe into this awareness, and as you exhale, you feel yourself drifting toward the next chapter, where the vast timeline of these cycles is drawn together, where the climate clock of deep time reveals the patience of Earth's rhythms, and you find yourself carried gently toward that reflection. You breathe slowly, and as your breath settles into rhythm, you begin to sense that the Earth itself keeps time, not in minutes or hours, not in the fleeting pace of human days, but in cycles that stretch across millions, even hundreds of millions of years, cycles that tick like the hands of a vast and patient clock, marking the rise and fall of oceans, the gathering and scattering of continents, the coming of ice ages and the return of warmth. And as you let your mind soften into this vision, You realize that tectonics is a pendulum of this clock, its steady swing guiding climate across deep time. Each collision of continents a mark on the dial, each opening of an ocean another tick forward, each uplift of a mountain range another chime in the slow song of the planet. You picture the great supercontinent cycle, lands gathering into single masses, then breaking apart again, each cycle lasting about 400 to 500 million years. And with each one the climate transforms, for when continents cluster, the interiors grow dry and harsh. Storms confine to coasts, deserts expanding across vast distances, while when continents scatter, oceans spread warmth across the globe, climates stabilize, diversity flourishes, and life blooms in abundance. And so the clock ticks, each cycle a breath in Earth's eternal rhythm. You imagine the carbon cycle, too, another gear in the mechanism, volcanoes releasing gases into the air, mountains drawing them down, oceans storing and releasing, a balance that over millions of years regulates the temperature, keeping Earth within the narrow bounds where life can thrive. And you realize that even when climates swing into extremes, into snowball Earths when ice spread to the equator, or into hothouse worlds when forests cover the poles, the balance returns, guided by the slow patience of tectonics. You drift further into deep time, to the Cryogenian period, more than 600 million years ago, when ice may have covered almost the entire planet, oceans sealed beneath frozen shells, and you see how the slow exhalation of volcanoes, releasing carbon dioxide over millions of years, eventually warmed the planet again, melting the ice, allowing life to expand, reminding you that even in its most extreme phases, the Earth's clock keeps moving, steady and faithful. You think of the warmth of the Mesozoic, when dinosaurs walked among polar forests, when shallow seas covered continents, when climate was far warmer than today, and you trace it back to the positions of continents, to the release of volcanic gases, to the absence of polar ice, all marks on the clock's face. You see the pulse of ice ages, too, not only in the last few million years, but scattered across deep history, tied to the rise of mountains, to the drawdown of carbon, to the isolation of continents at the poles. Each ice age another reminder that the Earth's pendulum swings between extremes but never breaks. You let your breath fall into this rhythm, slow and comforting, and you begin to sense that humanity's time upon this clock is but a moment, a brief flicker compared to the endless sweep of the hands. Yet within that flicker you have learned to read the clock, to study the sediments, the ice cores, the magnetic stripes on the seafloor, to trace the cycles written in stone. And in that knowledge there is both humility and wonder, for you are part of a story that began long before you and will continue long after. You rest in that humility, letting it comfort you rather than overwhelm you, for there is peace in knowing that the Earth's clock is kept steady for billions of years, guiding life through crises and rebirths, through extinctions and flourishes, always ticking forward, never stopping. You imagine holding that clock in your mind, seeing not a dial of 12 hours but a spiral of deep time, each turn carrying continents into new shapes, climates into new rhythms, and life into new forms. At the center of the spiral, always, is tectonics, the hidden pendulum of stone and fire. You breathe deeply again, and as you exhale you feel the approach of the final chapter, the last reflection, when the story turns not only to stone and sky but to you, to your place upon this living, breathing earth. And so you drift softly toward that closing, toward the thought of your place on the living earth. You breathe softly, and as you breathe you let your body feel the weight of the ground beneath you, the quiet strength of stone that holds you up, and in that stillness you begin to remember all that has unfolded across these chapters, the drifting continents, the rising mountains, the opening oceans, the frozen poles, the restless fires, the patient cycles of ice and warmth, all the movements of the planet that seem invisible in a human life, but are always unfolding beneath your feet. And as you let these images gather, you realize that this story is not only about Earth itself, but also about your place upon it, for you are not separate from the planet's rhythm. You are woven into it, your breath part of its breath, your body made of its elements, your life sustained by its climate, its seas, its soils, its air. You imagine the calcium in your bones, once washed from a mountain by rain, carried to the sea, taken up by shells, buried in sediments, and lifted again into stone before becoming part of you. You imagine the oxygen in your lungs, released by leaves nourished by rains, carried across continents by winds shaped by mountains. You imagine the water in your blood, evaporated from the ocean, rained upon land, frozen in glaciers, melted into rivers, and cycled endlessly before entering you. You feel yourself as an expression of Earth's deep cycles, not a visitor upon this world, but a continuation of it, shaped by the same tectonic rhythms that shape climate and stone. You think of how fragile life feels, how fleeting your own years are, and yet how deeply grounded they are in the planet's stability, in the balance kept by tectonics and climate through deep time, a balance that has allowed forests to grow, oceans to teem, and civilizations to rise. You rest in that thought, and as you rest, you sense that your place on Earth is both small and immense. Small in time, for your years are brief compared to mountains, oceans, and cycles of continents, yet immense in connection, for your breath and body are tied to those very rhythms, inseparable from them. You let yourself imagine standing on a high mountain, feeling the wind against your face, and knowing that this wind exists because stone was lifted by tectonic drift, guiding air into patterns that touch your skin. You imagine walking along a shoreline, waves lapping against your feet, and knowing that those waves are part of circulation that began centuries ago when warm waters rose and cold waters sank, guided by continents' positions. You imagine looking into a desert horizon, silence, stretching forever, and knowing that silence was written by mountains that stole the rain. Everywhere you stand in a story billions of years old, written by the motions of plates beneath your feet, and that story continues with you, for your choices, your life. Even your breath are part of the Earth's balance now. You realize that though tectonics and climate unfold on scales too vast to control, your life still matters, for the air you breathe, the forests you walk through, the rivers you drink from are all part of the delicate balance that sustains you, and your care, your awareness, your reverence of this planet is part of its unfolding story. You breathe again, slowly, and as you breathe, you feel gratitude rising, gratitude for ground that holds you, the air that cradles you, the seas that nourish you, gratitude for being part of this living earth. You let this gratitude settle in your body like a warm glow, steady and comforting. And you realize that though this chapter closes, the story does not, for the earth will keep moving, mountains will keep rising, oceans will keep opening, climates will keep shifting, and life will keep adapting. And within that story, you'll always have a place, not as an observer, but as a participant, a child of stone and sky, a being of water and breath. You let this realization wash over you, soft and gentle, like waves upon a shore, and as your thoughts quiet, you feel the peace of belonging, the peace of knowing that you are home in a universe carried forward by rhythms older than time itself. You rest in that peace, and as you do, the story folds into silence, not an ending but a continuation, the stillness before the next breath, the pause in which you, too, can drift into rest, carried on the living earth,